Okay, everybody. My name's Scott Dainty from Solo. It's already been mentioned. Just to inspire confidence, I finished this presentation on the train yesterday, so as I was coming down. So it may be a little bit choppy. Too long, don't read. Zero trust, buzzword, yes. Technology, maybe. Infosec Nirvana, it certainly can help towards delivering that. But what we're going to go through is basically a high-level view of what zero trust is, because it is a bit of a buzzword. It's been used a lot all over the industry at the moment. Really understand where we came from, and my particular view of zero trust, which is around application networking and the application tier, not necessarily the physical packet there. Okay. So just a quick question for the room. Does everybody have a zero trust strategy at the moment? A show of hands if you do have a zero trust strategy. Yeah, that's an interesting reaction because we get that a lot. So a lot of people we think we've got a strategy, but we don't know what it is. A lot of people really aren't implementing because actually, what is it? Is it a policy? Sorry, is it something that's that you can action on, or is it really something that is this buzzword? But what we see from stats, and this is it's given a year ago, that pretty much 80% of organisations are either thinking about implementing or are implementing parts of that strategy. But how do we get to where we are right now? Well, if people think about security in the good old days, security was really like defending the castle. It was all about, actually, all the stuff external is a threat. It's a bit of a challenge for us. We don't trust anything beyond the boundaries of our domain, i.e. the firewall. We secure the perimeter, and we provide a single point of entry, that sort of bridge over the moat to come in. But we trust everything inside the perimeter. Okay? We didn't really think about malicious actors or anything like that would happen within the firewall. But the world's changed, as we know, and unfortunately not everyone plays nice. So it's not really just about securing what's going on outside, it's how do we handle all of the complexities that's now happening, particularly when we look at how the world has changed. So we've gone from securing external users and devices, can people get access to our data from outside our organisation, to actually looking a little bit more at the internal legacy applications. What happens if somebody wants to stick in a USB stick and get some data out of my organisation, okay? To actually a much more distributed world where we're looking at cloud native, we're looking at microservices running in multiple different regions and different environments, both on-prem and different cloud providers, and how do we secure those multiple sort of threats that we can have because our exposure and the targets that we're putting out there are a lot more distributed. And the threat landscape's changed in multiple ways. Public cloud goes without saying. So everything was trusted inside your environment. Can everything be trusted inside other environments? And how do you really secure that communication? How do you observe that and what's happening within those environments? And how do you lock those things down? Microservices give us lots of attack vectors. So we've gone from monolithic applications, and speaking to some of you in the room, we're still there in some of our applications. But when you start to break down that application into hundreds of microservices, every single one of them has an attack vector. Every single one of them has different routes into that organization. So we've gone, into that piece of code. So we've gone away from that sort of single bridge over the moat getting into our organization to actually what's going on, how do we manage all of this? Open source technologies, I'm sure most of you are using open source technologies in your applications. Something that's written by somebody that we don't know who wrote it and how do we validate that? So the tools that allow us to do scanning, but I'm sure there's more than one organisation in the room that had problems with the Log4j issues a couple of years ago. Okay, so a similar thing, that's another attack vector that we need to think about that's inside our network effectively. Working from home, obviously everybody was doing that in COVID. It's nice to see faces back in the room. And also things like bring your own devices, which seems like ancient history, but actually more organisations are moving down that route as obviously more working from home. So all these attack vectors, all the things that have changed that threat landscape, that basically say we can't just worry about the perimeter. We've now got to start looking at what happens internally. So zero trust, I like to think about it as being a bit of a state of paranoia. Trust nobody and trust nothing. Okay? It's not just about people anymore. It's about verifying every single user, every single device, every application, every microservice is potentially a threat vector. Okay? It's not a nice thing to say, but it is almost a paranoia that we need to start to address. And we need to assume a zero trust position on everything, assume that nothing can be trusted is the best position that we can be in moving forwards. So the questions actually change from who has access to what. Does Peter have access to my data? Does Joan have access to my applications? To actually, what has access to what? because we've now got microservices, we've got code talking to code, we have systems talking to systems. So how do we verify the identity? How do we approve? How do we authorize? How do we make sure that we've got the right people and the right risk vectors covered? So everything now, every person, every device, every service, every Lambda, if you're using that sort of thing in AWS and all of these serverless code, every VM, every component on your network or external to your network has to have an identity that needs to be authorized and authenticated. That is what we really mean by zero trust. Okay? Without that identity and without approval and without authorization, you have no access to my data. So everything gets locked down. Makes sense? Okay. So is this a real thing? Well, certainly the US government thinks so. NIST is basically their view on zero trust architecture. This was something that was mandated by, I think, Biden's administration last year, that any government system now has to be zero trust sort of authenticated, or that's the direction they're going in. And in the UK, we have our own version of that, which is the National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ, which basically says, look, these are the principles that you now need to apply for best zero trust architecture design principles. Okay. Has everybody come across NIST or the UK government version of that? Okay. So because I'm British, we'll talk about the British version of this. And in fact, this is an older version of my deck, so I don't have quite the same slide. But effectively, what it boils down to is 5 key tenets. Firstly, assume that everything is hostile, but assume that the network is hostile. Assume that anything that happens inside your environment or that's connected to your environment is hostile and wants to kill you or get access to your data. Always presume a breach, because if you presume that a breach has already taken place, you can take the right mental position on actually how do we prevent these things from happening? How would we recover from that breach? Never trust, always verify, which is a position that we have changed from where we used to just secure the perimeter, which was never trust anything outside the perimeter, but trust everything inside our network. Okay? Scrutinize explicitly, and what we mean by that is basically, look, once you've verified and once you've validated, don't just take your word for it that it's still a trusted environment, okay? Something could have happened over time. So just make sure that you're validating all the time. Scrutinize everything explicitly all the time. Don't take anything for granted. And then finally, the sort of the backside of this isn't just the security, it's how do we monitor that security? How do we log everything that's happening? Okay? How do we understand and observe everything that's going on in my environment so that we can detect these problems and take recovery action over time? So again, my perspective on this is not really the physical network layer. Okay, the physical network layer is still very important, and there are organizations out there like I think Prisma Cloud and those sort of guys that can do all of that sort of stuff. I'm talking about slightly further up the stack, and that becomes really important when you're talking about cloud native, microservices, all those sort of architectures. So we're really looking at layer 3, layer 4, and layer 7 of the OSI model. Okay. So how do we tame the network? Well, we still need to consider what's happening externally. External systems, external people, external devices, external services, ingress and egress. How do things get into my network or where my things are running in my network, and how do we stop them from getting out? And we've got certain requirements around that. We have connectivity. So connectivity is really important. I mean, an InfoSec guy, an InfoSec specialist, their idea of Nirvana is it's a brick in a lead-lined room that's secured with snipers around the room that nobody has access to. But that doesn't solve anybody's problem. What we really need to do is make sure that we can connect to these things when we need to connect to these things, but we do it in a secure way. Okay? With a cloud, with all the moving parts, with everything being sort of temporal in nature, we need to make sure that we build resiliency into there as well. So if my network goes down, how do I fail over to another network, for example, but still provide that resiliency, still provide that security? Scalability. Scalability is a massive thing in the cloud, obviously. Horizontal and vertical scalability, as we see from organizations. Also scaling across clouds. Everybody has peaks and troughs in their business. How do we do that? But also, how do we do that in a secure way that's not going to increase my threat landscape? And then finally, that observability thing, which is tell me exactly what's going on. Give me full 360-degree visibility into how traffic is progressing through my network, any peaks and troughs, any denial of service attacks, anything that could cause me a threat moving forward. So ingress and egress traffic, we have something called an API gateway. Does people use API gateways currently within their organization? Okay, fine. So that takes us to our internal traffic, which is where I think is lagging behind a little bit with zero trust. Now, what we do as an organization at Solo, we work on top of things like service mesh technologies, which were mentioned by Nick earlier. So Istio is a service mesh technology of choice that we use. Istio is certainly becoming the de facto for service mesh technology, but you need to build other capabilities on there around zero trust posturing. So that internal service-to-service communication, which is service mesh, has got exactly the same challenges. It's got exactly the same things that we need to consider. It's connectivity. Can my systems connect to each other? Or when I don't want them to connect to each other, can I prevent that from happening at any point in time? We have the security challenges as well. What happens if you have malicious actors? And particularly when your data centers have now been dispersed and distributed globally, and you're using public cloud services, for example. Again, resiliency is another major requirement. How do we spin up? How do we spin down? How do we connect across these sort of environments? How do we route traffic in different ways based on policies that we've set with a policy enforcement point? And then observability. So if the requirements are the same for external traffic, ingress and egress, and also for internal traffic, why would the solution be any different? Okay. So we start to combine those two things together, and we have a new concept, a new positioning of zero trust, which is around application networking. Again, not at that physical network level, but at the application networking level. How can I prove identity? How can I apply policies that matter across not just my user, but the services, the APIs, and all of those sort of ingress and egress points at every service within my internal or external network? And that's really what we're doing with Solo. We're addressing all of these challenges with Glue Platform. If anybody wants a nice thing for their kids or for their dogs, this is Gluey, this little guy here. And we have these plushies on our stand, so if anybody wants one of those a little bit later on. But we're addressing these things holistically. We're providing you with a standardized way of doing ingress and egress, zero trust, locking everything down, taking a default deny position on any traffic that's coming into our network. Exactly the same thing with service-to-service communication. Now, you may say, well, it's not really as important if my development team A is trying to communicate with my development team B. But again, what happens if you have malicious actors there? And even things like traffic management, resiliency, denial of service, it may be not an explicit threat, but perhaps something goes wrong in this system over here that's talking to this system. And you still need to look at things like, traffic patterns. How can I route things in a different way based on resiliency patterns? And then finally, we bring in defense in depth. So we integrate with solutions like Cilium at the eBPF, layer 3, layer 4 level, that allows you to set policies that say, actually, at the IP level, these things can communicate, these things can't. But also at the application level, the HTML service 7, layer 7 of the OSI model, we slam all that stuff together that gives you this zero trust application networking platform that addresses a lot of the challenges we talked about. So the title of this section was Buzzword, Technology, or Infosec Nirvana. I think we've proven it's a bit of a buzzword, but actually there's something behind this. Zero trust is an approach, it's a mindset, it's a way of doing this. It's a little bit like DevOps. Is DevOps really a thing? Do you get DevOps tools? Yes, you do, but they fit into that broader concept. So zero trust is really an approach. It's not a protocol, it's not a product. However, those products can actually really give you the ability to apply a zero trust posture to your applications and to your endpoints and any sort of threat levels that you may have. So a combination of an effective zero trust mindset, that strategy, and also tooling, which is important, will deliver that zero trust policy and posture that you're after. And from our point of view, the application is now the most important thing. The network is important as a transport layer, but the application is really where the innovation is in most organizations. So you need to turn the network through those application-focused layers, so layer 3, 4, and 7 of the OSI model, and that's what we call application networking. So that concludes my pitch.